Today at the fair, the coalition has assembled just this amazing lineup of speakers. So excited to have all of you here. And we will talk a lot about barriers and gaps today and how we can improve lives for rare disease families. But before we do, I just always like to say that it's important to step back and be grateful for how many resources we have, this exciting time in science. Grateful for the people that are working so hard to make our lives better every day. And we're just so lucky in so many ways. And so after Malaysia, I'll say Mariana was so excited to be in the ER room because it had walls. So just grateful for the walls. And I just think about actionable items as we go through the event of what we can do together to move things forward, because as you know, time is of essence with rare diseases. And then I guess my wish for today is that while you learn and when you go back to your jobs, just remember these kids and these patients and remember why you're doing what you're doing. And I also just based on the stories, I'm not someone that likes to normally talk about all this stuff, so I just letting you know, just our families there's so many people that are going through so much, and you just never know what people are going through, so just be kind. Somebody might just be having a bad day. So, and then for families, I hope that you continue to find opportunities to share your story, and whether that's through the FDA, Centers of Excellence, researchers, with legislators, at kids' schools, during the drug development process, and on social media is just so important. And I share this story today because people just don't know. The people don't know what they don't know. And sharing our stories is what helps people understand what our journeys are like. So just really encourage you to do that. And now I want to introduce you to someone really special. Mason, I see you. Do you want to come up here? He has something to say. Has some appointments today, and he still came here to talk to us. And so I believe that just the young voice is so important, young advocates. And so Mason has gone through so much, and he wanted to have an opportunity to speak, and he has a couple appointments today, so he still made it. And that's rare disease life for you. You have hospital visits, and you still make it, and you show up. And I know Sarah's always lobbied from the hospital, and so there you go. So I'd like to welcome Mason. These are our sponsors. Thank you to our sponsors.
So my name is Mason Gordon. I'm only 19, and I've been through the ringer to the middle finger, I tell ya. But just a few quick things about me is, like I said, I'm 19. I go to Seattle Children's, and having a rare disease like mine, because I have an inoperable brain tumor called a pilocytic astrocytoma, it sucks. I wish it would be to snap my fingers like that and it'd disappear like that. Oh, I tell you, having a rare disease sucks. But that's okay. Take it one day at a time. But, yeah, and I at least favorite thing about everything, it sucks having a rare disease. And that's really all I gotta say. So thanks.
So I would like to introduce someone else now. Please continue to just advocate again for a patient voice. It should be at the center of research and innovation within our community. Our patients are, again, often the experts in these diseases and understand the gaps and the barriers because they live it and they know the system. So these are our heroes and have the complete power to change the healthcare system. So I'm going to be introducing this beautiful mother, Tanja Bandt, and she's the director of patient advocacy at, okay, I'm going to say this wrong. Did you just say the ARG1D? Is that ARG1D? Okay. So excited to have you here today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanja Bandt, and I am the mother of a lovely 12-year-old girl named Willow, who was diagnosed with arginase 1 deficiency right before her 5th birthday. As many in here are familiar with, the road to diagnosis can be a long one, and that was no different for us. Willow's life started off as a very happy but serious baby. She was the baby that people would smile and wave and pull all kinds of faces at to try to get her to respond in any way, laugh, anything, and she wouldn't budge. She would just deadpan stare back at them. I always found this very charming and funny. Has nothing to do with her disorder. I just think it's a funny part of her baby personality. She was nailing every milestone until around 8 months or so, when she was supposed to be pulling herself up. I wasn't too worried about it, but it did come up at one of her checkups, and her pediatrician told me it was fine. I just needed to stop holding my baby so much. I'll let that advice sit there with you for a second. It wasn't until Willow was around 1.5 years and still not walking that we were referred out to physical therapy. We were told that she had low tone and was going to need some additional strengthening, but there wasn't anything too concerning. No one seemed to have any red glaring flags or anything at the time. She started walking shortly thereafter, right before her 2nd birthday, and continued along that trajectory for a while. She would hit her milestones just a little later than others on her own time. She eventually got to a point where she was running and jumping and playing, just like her peers. She was a little clumsy, but she would still accomplish the same motor skills. It would just look a little bit different sometimes. We kept her in swimming or physical therapy or ballet and would always encourage her to incorporate core and leg strengthening games. However, when she was 3, we started to notice that she was stumbling and falling down more. Her gait was shifting too. She was looking a little stiffer. She had a pretty big sway in her low back. And when she was running, she would pick her chest up and her knees up, kind of like she was marching. She also had a bit of a side-to-side sway as she was walking or running. She was also slipping closer and closer to failure to thrive, and she wasn't growing taller or gaining any weight, and it had been that way for a while. When we took her in for her 4-year well-child checkup, her pediatrician, a different one than when she was a baby, said it was time to get some further testing done. We were thinking maybe cerebral palsy or spina bifida, but that wasn't the case. We had lots of imaging and blood work done. Each initial test would come back without any abnormalities, and it would look inconclusive. So they would order another test, and then another, and then another. We saw specialist after specialist, each one coming up empty-handed during this time. During this time, Willow's disease was also progressing, whatever it was. She was getting even stiffer. She was having a harder time moving. She was tripping and falling down even more. She was no longer able to play with her peers and was losing a lot of confidence in her physical capabilities. Additionally, we were seeing a standstill in her cognitive development. She was always very vocal and spoke well beyond her age. She used to learn very similar to others, but we started to notice that she was falling behind what her peers could do in preschool. Memorizing new songs, making connections between sounds and letters, and following 2-step instructions were becoming very challenging for her. Once we started testing, it was about 1 year until we finally got her diagnosis. Now that we knew something was definitely going on, not just low tone, our outlook had changed. The unknown is a very scary place to be stuck in. That year was filled with so much fear, anticipation, hope, letdown, and despair. Also during this time, Willow developed a new symptom that finally got us to our diagnosis. She started having absence seizures. They started off so short and few and far between that we weren't really sure what we were seeing. Eventually, though, it was glaringly obvious. She was having about 20 a day, and those were just the longer ones that we were catching. We told her most recent specialist about this, and he was able to pivot to a metabolic disorder. And then, after a negative GAMT test, we got a positive result for arginase 1 deficiency. Arginase 1 deficiency, we learned, is one of the urea cycle disorders and is very rare. As the body processes the food we eat, one of the byproducts created is ammonia, which is toxic to our system if not removed. There are various steps within this cycle, and arginase 1 deficiency is related to the final step, where we see arginine getting processed. It should be converted to urea and be eliminated from the body, but without the arginase enzyme to do this, arginine gets built up in the system. This missing arginase enzyme was causing all of the symptoms we were seeing. When we finally did get her diagnosis, I felt so hopeful, so eager to start treatment because we finally had an answer. And that's what happens when you get a diagnosis, right? You start a treatment, you see improvement. Unfortunately, once the diagnosis settled in, we learned more about it, and we learned there wasn't really a treatment, not an effective one anyway. We were told to keep protein low, around 8 to 10 grams a day. That's about 3 tablespoons of peanut butter. for a whole day. And that was the treatment, a low-protein diet. She also had seizure medications, muscle relaxers, and an essential amino acid formula to help give her body what it needed to grow since her protein intake was so reduced. But we followed every regimen to the T. We counted everything she ate and everything she drank. And it was really challenging. We couldn't go out to eat, meals with friends were hard, playdates always came with many questions or awkward comments and pity. All she wanted was to eat lunch from school, have cake at birthday parties like everyone else. My girl also had a very niche career choice at the time, a firefighting ballerina. Even with us following everything so strictly, we still couldn't get her arginine levels down. The normal range for our lab was somewhere around 30 to 130, but Willow was around 500. She was still having many absent seizures a day, even with the medications. This was making learning very challenging. She was still having lots of spasticity, struggling with overall weakness, struggling with school. This treatment just made her symptom progression slow down, but it was still a progressive disease. She will still continue to get worse and take on more brain damage. Finally, though, in 2019, we were informed of a clinical trial that would provide her body with the enzyme it wasn't able to make. Initially, we were reluctant, but we decided to take part in the end after a lot of research. This treatment was as close to a cure as what we could have hoped. It took a couple of years, but we were seeing amazing improvement. Once the double blind was lifted, we could see the results from the collected data. On a biochemical level, the drug worked almost immediately. The primary endpoint of the study was being met, which was to get arginine reduced to within a normal range. This was the first time ever that we were seeing Willow's arginine levels read as normal. It was just a few numbers on the screen, but it was incredibly emotional for us. It took a few years to see the physical and cognitive improvements, but they came. Now, we try very hard not to compare ourselves to others in our household, but we don't really focus on grade level learning and capabilities. However, I will say Willow struggled with academics and learning in a typical classroom. Previously, it was taking a lot longer to grasp new concepts and apply them. But while on this treatment, she started learning faster and applying the new material with ease. This resulted in literally off-the-chart test scores when compared to previous years. We were able to take her off her seizure medications without any episodes. She was moving easier with less stiffness and had much more stamina. She was riding horses twice a week and did ballet once a week. And lastly, the study started off with weekly IVs at the hospital, but those had turned to subcutaneous injections at home with the home health nurse. Everyone we knew that had been on the drug was telling a very similar story as well. People's lives were better. Adults could finally work full-time and support themselves. Kids had enough energy to be kids. The unwanted effects were minimal or non-existent in many cases. But unfortunately, after about 2.5 years, very successful years on the drug, and all of our lives being improved, the drug was taken from us. The company and the FDA didn't see eye to eye, and the FDA refused to review the submission for approval. The company did not handle the situation well with the trial participants, and we were left completely blindsided. We felt the lives of our precious community were put back in jeopardy again because of bureaucracy and politics. The drug has been purchased by a European organization, and we are hopeful we will start back on the drug soon, but as of right now, we are still without it. Willow has been off drug for about 1.5 years now, and is much worse because of this. Sorry, I lost my spot. She's much more stiff now. She is tripping and falling down again. Her spasticity is much worse, and because of this, her muscle relaxer has been increased for the first time since being prescribed the drug back in 2016. She was having terrible leg cramps every day that would leave her sore for days after. We introduced a nitrogen scavenger to help bring down her arginine levels, and she is so exhausted after school she can't really get out of bed. She is sick also about once a month as her immune system struggles. This drug made her life better. It made all of our lives better, caregivers included. Even with getting shots or IVs every week, Willow will tell you she wants her medicine back. It is absolutely imperative that we continue to push forward and demand changes to continue to be made at the FDA. This can be done through speaking on the Hill in Washington, D.C., or writing your local members of Congress. This can be a daunting and potentially unobtainable for many. One thing that is usually right in our back pockets can also be wildly powerful. Never underestimate the power of social media and the internet. It can feel like the wild, wild west out there sometimes, but just following some rare disease advocates or organizations can take you far. Maybe you download a podcast that is all about the rare disease world, where you hear an unbelievable story of being the first person diagnosed with an ultra-rare disease, and you share this with a coworker or post about it online somewhere. Maybe an incredibly tenacious mother of a rare disease kiddo posts about a bill you can support by checking some boxes on a piece of paper. Or maybe you stumble across a flyer for a rare disease conference and you attend to meet others that might have some sort of an idea of what you're going through. Who knows, it might lead you to sharing your story at a conference someday. By opening your world up to others in this community, even virtually, you can make a huge difference. You can help change laws or policies, broaden your own perspective and knowledge, and help share accurate information that may not ever make it to your social circles otherwise. Now, as I wrap up, I would like to tell you that there are some benefits to having a disability. Willow proudly wears her disease like a badge of honor, and she should. Because of her disease, Willow is a fighter. She has a deeply ingrained knowledge of what is important to her, who she is, even at her young age. She will be the first person to stick up for another. She is loyal and a loyal friend and loves strongly. She is incredibly brave and resilient. She can come to a medical conference and listen to her own mother lay out her struggles in the name of awareness and advocacy. Her disease may very well be 1 in a million, but Willow is 1 in 8 billion, truly one of a kind. Should I call her up here? Yeah, of course. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that story. I just think it's so humbling to share your story. So it takes a lot of courage, and but these moms, just because they know it's going to help, they do it anyways. And so that's just the power of these families. I'm just so grateful for them. I want to introduce actually her daughter, who we just heard about, and she's gonna. Her name is Willow Bandt. And she's going to be really courageous today and sing a song. And so we're just so excited to have her here today. And again, I just think that young voices are so important in this story. So thank you, Willow.
No, there's gotta be rain if I want the rainbows. But I know the higher I climb, the harder the wind blows. Yeah, I've gone to sleep night after night, punching a pillow. But do you know the darker the night, the brighter the stars glow? 'Cause I am resilient, full flower moment, won't let the concrete hold me back. Oh no, I am resilient, born to be brilliant. You'll see me grow right through the cracks. 'Cause you're gonna watch this flower grow right through the cracks. I've got to shadow the skin if I want the distant. Let the sun in, pull out the weak, and focus my vision. 'Cause there's no mistakes, just bends and breaks and friction. But do you know the harder the fire, the purer the gold is? 'Cause I am resilient, full flower moment, won't let the concrete hold me back. Oh no, I am resilient, born to be brilliant. I'm gonna grow right through the cracks. 'Cause I die every winter, but survived all the weather. Look at me now, I'm in full bloom. They tried to poison the water, but I was a little stronger. Look at me now, I light up the room. Oh yeah, 'cause I am resilient. A full flower moment. Won't let the concrete hold me back, no. I am resilient, born to be brilliant. I'm gonna grow right through the cracks. Oh, you're gonna watch this flower grow right through the cracks.
Well, that was amazing. Can we give another hand of applause? Thank you so much for doing that and being so courageous again. And that was a beautiful song. And we're just so grateful that you came and that you did that for us. So thank you. And thank you for sharing your story with us. I'm going to introduce the moderator for the next section, which is Katie Golden Grant. There she is. And she's a genetic counselor in Genomics Laboratory at Rady's Children's Institute for Genomic Medicine. She's a genetic counselor by training, and she's in our genetic testing task force and is just this amazing human. And wait, do you teach at UW too? I don't have all my notes. Yeah. She's a professor at university.
I have been, not currently, but yes.
Okay, so sorry. And she's just a wonderful human and just been so involved with everything that we do as far as genetics and genomics. And we've been doing some advocating with the new generation of genetic counselors, which has been great. And Jesse and Katie have both been leading this task force, so grateful for you. And I'll just let you take it from here.
We have Julie Boyd, who is the Senior Director of State Government Affairs at Ultragenyx, a biopharmaceutical company on a mission to treat rare and ultra-rare diseases. And Julie covers the western part of the country. Hi, Julie. We have Katie Stoll. Katie's a genetic counselor and executive director of the Genetic Support Foundation, and a nonprofit whose mission is to increase access to genetic counseling. Katie lives in Olympia and has practiced as a genetic counselor in the Northwest for over 20 years. I'd also like to introduce Max Brown. Max is the VP of Public Affairs for the Desimone consulting group, where he helps clients, including the Northwest Rare Disease Coalition, advance policies related to healthcare and healthcare access and life sciences. Thanks, Max. The purpose of this panel is to bring together a couple of topics that we will be hearing more about, and I think have been hearing a lot about in the rare disease community. Those topics are newborn screening and genome sequencing, and we'll be discussing differences between screening and diagnostic testing, as well as exploring the care needs of families who are undergoing either. And then, importantly, we'll highlight some policy measures in Washington state as well as federally, which support families diagnosed with rare disease, including the Access to Genetic Counselor Services Act bill. Okay, so first of all, we're going to start with Julie, and Julie's going to introduce us to newborn screening, give us some history and current state. Thanks, Julie.
Good morning, everyone. Katie, thank you for that nice introduction. I'm Julie Boyd, part of the State Government Affairs team for Ultragenyx, and thank you for having me today. I'm going to be talking through what newborn screening is and what the Recommended Uniform Screening Panel, or the RUSP, is, and briefly touch on genomic sequencing and how both programs benefit the public health of newborns and families. So newborn screening programs are state-run public health programs that identify newborns with certain genetic, metabolic, hormonal, or functional disorders. Newborn screening is one of the most successful public health initiatives in the U.S., and it's important because when a disorder is detected, nearly via newborn screening, affected infants can receive earlier intervention. So just a few numbers. There are 4 million babies that are screened each year in the U.S. So that's 13,000 newborns, or 1 in 300 born in the U.S., or roughly 276 that are born in Washington State will have a condition that's detected through newborn screening. So the types of newborn screening you can see here, there's a heel prick where a small blood sample is collected. And then there's a hearing screening as well. So every baby in the U.S. is screened unless a parent decides to opt out for religious reasons. Oh. Okay, really quickly. That picture is actually my coworker, Lisa, when her daughter was just a few hours old getting her heel prick. So just wanted to share that too. She wanted to make sure that I shared that picture as well. So what is the RUSP? And how are these conditions that are on the newborn screening panel decided? So it comes from a federal decision. The ACH-DNC, which is the Advisory Committee on Heritable Disorders and Genetic Diseases in Newborns and Children, they decide which conditions are added to state testing panels. There are 63 conditions total, 37 core conditions, and 26 secondary conditions. So you can see the criteria listed on the last bullet of what has to be there for a condition to be added to the RUSP. And then newborn screening operates very differently in each state. Each Department of Health within the state creates and implements a process for the collection of the blood samples, performs all the testing, and develops a follow-up procedure. Essentially, every state operates very differently. The conditions newborns are screened for differ from state to state. And most states screen for at least 31 of the 37 core conditions recommended by the ACH-DNC. So last year was the 60th anniversary of the implementation of newborn screening. This map indicates what states are screening for what numbers of conditions. Newborn screening began when Dr. Robert Guthrie devised a blood test for PKU in 1958. Massachusetts was the first state or Commonwealth to mandate newborn screening, beginning with PKU in 1963. In the early 90s, there were advances made that led to a large expansion of potentially detectable diseases. So by the early 2000s, some states were screening for as few as 4 conditions, while other states were screening for as many as 50. Some other numbers just for context. In 2005, the American College of Medical Genetics recommended 29 core conditions to compromise the RUSP panel. The Department of Health and Human Services ultimately adopted the RUSP in 2010, which resulted in a greater uniformity among states in terms of conditions that are screened for. By 2011, all states are screening for at least 26 conditions, and by 2022, all states were screening for at least 31 core conditions. So you can see we are coming upon 61 years of this great program. So, but there are some limitations. Of the 63 total conditions, only 8 core conditions have been added to the RUSP since the ACMG first produced the RUSP in 2005. The process of adding a condition to the RUSP can take years. The federal committee responsible for reviewing conditions and recommending whether or not to add them to the RUSP indicated last year that they only have resources to review 2 conditions per year. This is nowhere near enough. Another limitation is once a condition is added to the RUSP, it can take many more years for states to add the condition to their screening panels. For example, MPS 1 was added to the RUSP in 2016. All 50 states are still not screening for this condition as of last summer. The lengthy timelines have real-world consequences. For Washington State, I just want to give a little bit of background of how a condition is added here. So the first step is a condition is added to the RUSP federally. Then the Washington Department of Health files a decision package. This is basically the department telling the legislature that they want to add X condition. Then it goes to the Newborn Screening Advisory Committee, and they have to vote to add the condition. Next, it goes to the State Board of Health to accept the recommendation, and everything is dependent on funding. Next, it goes to the legislature to approve or add funds into their budget. And if they do so, the last step is a public hearing with the State Board of Health where it's finally approved. So you can see on this slide the different conditions on the grid and how long it's taken them to be added to. That's just the average years to implement that condition. So there are things that states can do to become more uniform. Ultragenics is very committed to encouraging states to screen for all they can because it's the right thing to do for any newborn screening program. There are some ideal elements that make up this RUSP parity legislation that some states have already passed. This is for states who are lagging behind to get up to parity, and for states who are caught up to prepare for new conditions at a faster pace. So instead of having to go through the procedure of passing legislation every time a condition is added, it gives the authority to the lab or to the health department to go ahead and add that condition. And also using the screening fees collected for newborn screening to add more conditions, to buy equipment, to pay staff, all of those kinds of things. This slide represents states that have already passed some sort of RUSP parity legislation. The bill in Wisconsin did not pass this year. I just found out this past week, so hopefully we will see that again next year. And then there's some target states for 2025. This RUSP parity legislation comes from the EveryLife Foundation, and they usually pick a couple of states every year to focus on. So I don't know what states they will be focusing on in 2025. So, but fingers crossed, we will hopefully see something in Washington. And then I want to give just a example of what newborn screening really means. So this is baby Emma, and she was born, and a day after she was born, her mother noticed that she was shaky. The nurses at the hospital checked her sugar level, and it came back within normal limits. And they told the parents that sometimes newborns are shaky due to the nervous system trying to get acclimated to being outside of the womb. So the following evening, Emma's temperature dropped. The nurse said she would come back within 15 minutes to check it again, and by the time she came back, Emma was cold and pale with a low temperature. Her sugar level was so low that the reader could not pick up a number. She was rushed to the NICU, and she rebounded. But the issue wasn't that simple. This had been a metabolic crisis that if it was left unchecked, could have led to a stroke, seizures, or brain damage, or coma. When the results came back from newborn screening, they were told that she tested positive for a rare, life-threatening metabolic disorder that required feeding every 2 hours around the clock. According to the doctors, the management of this disorder is easy in timing, but unforgiving if the episodes are not caught in time. So that's just an example of newborn screening saves lives. The last thing I'm going to focus on is genomic sequencing. This is basically phase 2 of newborn screening, basically. Whole genome sequencing is a genetic test that reads through most of the individual's DNA sequence to look for changes in the spelling of genes. When a gene contains a spelling error or variant, it may not work properly and can lead to a genetic disorder. An advanced method of whole genome sequencing can cut time to obtain results down to a matter of days compared to weeks. Having a fast, precise diagnosis to guide personalized care can make all the difference for critically ill newborns and their families. With high-risk infants with genetic diseases, time to treat is crucial. So in conclusion, both the state newborn screening programs and genomic sequencing serve incredible purposes and both save lives. Thank you for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie, for setting the stage and giving us some excellent background about newborn screening as well as the potential for newborn sequencing. I wanted to kind of bring us, now that we've gotten that foundation, I want to focus a bit on the clinical implications of newborn screening in particular. So I'm hoping, Katie, that you could walk us through, based on your clinical experience, kind of what you see, what follow-up for newborn screening may look like, and what you have encountered as far as what families may be going through during that period of time.
I hope you'll share your experience too, Katie. I feel I am, as a genetic counselor in the role that I'm in, I often don't see people that are in the midst of a new positive screening test through newborn screening, just in the place that I'm at and the kind of trajectory of patient care. But I know that it can take time to add conditions, and it's a pretty complex process. I think there is definitely a lot of care that goes into the resources, not just to do the screening, but also the follow-up. There's quite an investment on the part of the public health team to be able to make sure that they're getting these results communicated to the newborn's care team in a timely fashion. There are different kind of next steps for babies in Washington State with regards to newborn screening in terms of what specialty care or additional testing might be recommended. But as a first step, really, it's the public health team working diligently to track down the baby's provider in a timely way and to transfer that, hand off that next step of information in terms of recommendations for either diagnostic testing or additional screening.
Yeah, so there are a lot of systems involved in newborn screening, from the state government system, even the federal government making the RUSP, the states deciding what conditions are on, the state labs running the testing, the labs getting in contact with the providers. The patients are new to the provider, right, the pediatrician, and then there's lifetime care in most cases for positive babies who screen positive and then have a confirmed positive test. So lots of systems at play when we're talking about a public health. It's such a huge initiative that millions of, that at most, 98% of babies born in the U.S. Undergo. So that's massive. Max, now that we have learned a bit about how decisions are made regarding what conditions are screened for and this effort for parity between states, can you speak to some examples of laws or legislative efforts that support newborn screening and follow-up care?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for the good question. I think Julie covered some very important points that kind of frame the opportunities for advancement and kind of legislation and policy. You're right. So the federal government makes recommendations about what conditions should be on the recommended uniform screening panel, but it's up to individual states to decide how many of those conditions they add and the kind of process by which those conditions are added. Like, how are they vetted? How does the the state decide those metrics. In Washington State, and I should note importantly, in Washington State, we do not yet have legislation passed that requires our state Board of Health to either add those recommendations from the federal government. I think you heard Julie referred to like RUSP parity legislation. We do not have that in Washington State yet, nor does our state require any timeline from when new conditions are added to the RUSP to when our state Board of Health should consider those conditions locally. So that's, I would say, first quick answer to your good question. There's sort of two ways you can address that at the state level. From a policy perspective, you can pass what's called RUSP parity legislation, which would say, when the federal government, creates a new recommendation for something on the RUSP, the state has so many years to add that locally. Or you can put sort of a timeline under which the state has to consider those conditions, and it's kind of due process. So in Washington State, there are sort of 4 ways that the State Board of Health thinks about whether or not they add new conditions to the panel. They consider, first, whether or not there is a screening technology available to screen for the disease. They consider whether there is a treatment for that disease available as a part of deciding whether or not they might add it to the screening program. They think about the public health rationale, essentially trying to understand if earlier detection for a disease will lead to a change in treatment outcome for a given patient. And then they do also assign sort of a cost-benefit analysis. And sorry, this gets a little dark when we're talking about people's lives. But the state does say, we screen for X number of patients, it costs X amount of dollars. We anticipate we're going to detect so many patients in that time. Here's the sort of relative economic value of having folks in treatment versus not. So on any number of those kind of individual considerations, you could also sort of think through ways that good policy could help get the state to say yes more often to more of these things to think through when adding newborn screening. So if, for example, the state had funding or state labs had more capacity to screen for more tests and the legislature were to appropriate more funding to help that happen, or the state were to say, we're going to allocate more funding to process specimens more quickly, right? That might change some of these answers from a no to a yes. If the state thinks, I can get a sample back in 2 days instead of 10 days, then that sort of changes their calculus about whether or not this new screening would be efficacious. So I think kind of along those lines, when we talk about what can we do at the state, it's getting more people screened earlier with better technologies. It's more capacity for our State Department of Health and our lab system to process samples more quickly. And those types of things we can address directly by advocating for more funding, by advocating for our state lab system to have more capacity to process more tests, to be able to screen more people, so we get to yes on some of these more quickly and more conditions get added to the panel. So that's how I'd kind of quickly summarize the opportunities and some things that have been done in other states to help in this process. Oh, yes. And Representative Neelan Tai will be here in a little bit. I believe it was 2019. She did introduce RUSP parity legislation in Washington State. That bill did not move forward. She, put a very specific time criteria. I think it was 2 years from which something being added to the RUSP would then be on the state screening panel. So we'll have an opportunity to chat with her about that. There is certainly model legislation that we've seen in Washington State that's been put forward for consideration on that. Yeah.
So I think we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to move forward to skip some of what we had talked about. And I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to talk about the Access to Genetic Counselor Services Act and specifically how support for that bill would help support families and how this all connects to each other, right? We're talking about potentially expanding newborn screening. In Washington State, we're talking future about possibly using sequencing for newborn screening. And all of that, for me, what comes up is families are going to need more education and more care. And so I'm hopeful that Katie and Max, you can talk about the importance of that legislation in support of families.
Thank you. I know I talked a lot about this yesterday for everybody that was there yesterday, so I'm sorry for the broken record. But so genetic counseling services are largely not reimbursed by payers. Genetic counselors aren't recognized by Medicare, and many commercial payers and state Medicaid programs follow Medicare guidance around that. So these long wait times to get in to see a genetics provider, to some degree, are due to the fact that it's difficult for hospitals to justify bringing genetic counselors onto their staff because there's not a great way to pay for the services that they provide. So there is federal legislation that's been introduced now, I think, for the third time. So we'll hope we'll get some action moving forward. This would be wonderful if the Northwest Rare Disease Coalition could also, be supporting that federal legislation to bring that support. I totally agree that as we're expanding these technologies and thinking about, the future of whole genome sequencing that could be newborn screening in the future, we're going to need more support to help families navigate this, for sure. I know we don't have a lot of time, but something that you kind of brought up and was brought up yesterday during the discussions by Dr. Mike Ashton about, well, what if we just did whole genome sequencing for our newborn screening? And there's definitely a lot of, I think, energy and some initiatives around doing that. But there is, I think, something important to just to recognize in terms of the difference between screening and diagnostic testing, which is one of the things we were hoping to talk about a little bit, and that when we're talking about whole genome sequencing of critically ill newborns or people with undiagnosed conditions, that can lead to a diagnosis. It's considered a diagnostic test. It's a totally different situation when you're talking about sequencing all newborns, because the more you're looking at these rare conditions, these rare gene variants in the general population, you're going to see many more false positives and many variants that we don't know what to do with. So kind of the downstream effects of that are pretty important to think about. So I think a big difference between whole genome sequencing when we're talking about a screening, population screening program versus undiagnosed conditions. So.
Really appreciate you, Katie, and the panel for sharing all the insights on newborn screening and whole genome sequencing. At the Coalition, and for those who don't know me, I'm Joshua Henderson, co-founder with Max and Carolina of the Northwest Rare Disease Coalition. We're really focused on this issue because, not just because of shortening the diagnostic odyssey, but we've thought a lot about sort of this RUSP parity approach and really see whole genome sequencing as complementary. I mean, there are newborn screening that's done for non-genetic conditions, and sort of looking at whole genome sequencing as an opportunity to expand broadly into hundreds, thousands of conditions. And I think what's really interesting, Max mentioned sort of, again, that kind of dark, cost-benefit analysis that's done. But I think what's really exciting is, when does the cost-benefit analysis for newborn whole genome sequencing warrant that whole genome sequencing earlier, and what that will do for diagnosis, what that will do as diagnostic rates go up for a lot of rare conditions that are misdiagnosed, that are underdiagnosed, in incentivizing new treatments to be developed for conditions that today, again, all these cost-benefit analysis that, pharma does around going into new conditions, like what whole genome sequencing could do for that. So anyway, it's a big focus area for us at the Coalition. Hope to capture those in the audience who want to get more involved with that. We'd love to talk with you. With that, I'm going to bring up our next, which is a video. So Katya Moritz with the Undiagnosed documentary, which we hope to bring to Washington.
Hey everyone, this is Dr. Katja Moritz, co-director and creator of the movie Undiagnosed. I'm so excited to show you guys the trailer today. It is very important that we talk about the undiagnosed diagnosis and going into ICD-11. We are advocating very, very strongly for patients who have no diagnosis to have a way to communicate, for doctors to be able to talk about these patients, and for them to be able to get insurance coverage, ability to get the test done. It is very important that we find a way to communicate what it is to be in the journey of being undiagnosed. So I'm so excited to show you the movie. From the time we started to today, there's not a lot of difference in terms of providing people with undiagnosed diagnosis. If you go to a doctor still and tell the doctor that you are undiagnosed, you may hear, what do you mean? We want to change that. And the way to change that is if we are able to get together and support that ICD-11 carries a diagnosis that expresses the diagnostic odyssey for patients, families, and doctors. Thank you so much and enjoy the movie. I hope you see the whole movie. Join us for the next viewing of the movie. Take care.
Lillian Dorn Grossman, happy birthday to you, dear. I hope you have a sunshiny day and a happy life. I love you.
After Alex was born, there was nothing unusual that the doctors noticed about him.
They'd all kind of written me off as this crazy mother that was just trying to push through the system because nothing was happening. Time is ticking and Lily's getting older.
Many people refer to his journey in the last 15 years as the climb of his life.
I realized there are so many others out there dealing with life and death situations.
He had a seizure. By the time I got to the hospital, they said he had 3 more in the ambulance. We're kind of going in blind.
Managing hope is really a big part of living undiagnosed.
When I first met Katja, that was the first time actually that I had the definition of undiagnosed.
Without a diagnosis, these patients don't have any medical home. They don't have any support network.
There are so many needless bits of suffering, missed opportunities to discover. We're not learning. We're not a learning healthcare system.
The undiagnosed disease population provides such precious, important information.
He's clearly hyperreflexic.
It really will take a village for us to create a better system to diagnose patients.
A goo is the best, oh, a goo is the best, oh, a goo is the best in the world.
I miss home, but there's a feeling in my bones, like a part of me don't know.
So when you have a diagnosis, it makes you part of a community. And we know that patients who are diagnosed, even with bad disorders, are very altruistic. They want to help others, and that becomes a part of their life, a part of their life's meaning.
I know some of you have traveled far and wide, so I really appreciate everybody coming. We've been through a lot, so we can help you toward the long term.
This is like the future of medicine right here.
That's right here. We're going to learn more about ourselves than we ever have.
We realize that collaboration plus new technologies equaled hope.
Someday's gonna be one day soon.
Katja, there is a diagnosis for Alex.
What?
One day soon.
So this is the undiagnosedfilm.com. You can actually bring it to your state. We're going to be doing this. We're partnering with PNRI, I think, to do this. That's the hope. So just an exciting. Oh, there's PNRI. So excited for this, to watch this. And I think Christine, you're in the audience. You're in the video, right, Christine? Are you in part of the undiagnosed film? No. No, okay, I thought it was, okay. Okay. So anyways, so now I would like to introduce the next session, Unlocking Access, the Impact of ICD Coding for Rare Disease. We have a great group of panelists coming forward. And also I'll make a quick announcement too, sorry. There's some art that's being sold outside. And one resource that I want to share with you is Rare Parenting Magazine. This lady she worked for Vogue and all these companies, and it's an amazing magazine with resources for rare disease parents, rareparenting.com. And it's all research-based, great content for rare parenting. So again, I'd just like to bring in our panelists. Max is going to be moderating the section. Again, he's the other co-founder of the Northwest Rare Disease Coalition, the vice president of public affairs for Desimone Consulting Group, and he just has done such a wonderful job of leading our patients here in Washington with all things legislation. So thank you, Max.
All right, hello again. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. You heard Katja talk about, she mentioned ICD-11 codes very quickly, which I know went by fast there, but we have a panel here today and some experts who are going to kind of take you behind the scenes of this sometimes confusing and not very helpful coding system that our healthcare system has. Is to say, when you come into a clinical system, you're given sort of a designation of diagnosis that can impact a lot of the care you receive or don't receive. And if you don't have a code, like many rare disease patients do, you experience a lot of gaps, as many of the folks here in the audience are aware of. So excited to be joining with a couple of folks. Jessie Conta is the owner of Pickhandle Consulting. She's also a laboratory stewardship consultant. We have joining us, and if y'all want to come down here and grab a seat where you're comfortable, Helen Hernandez. Helen is the founder of the R69 initiative, and R69 is the undiagnosed ICD code. R69 initiative, she's a founder and scientist at KAL Research Initiatives, which is an organization dedicated to helping people affected by rare and undiagnosed conditions. Also excited to welcome Sarah Tompkins. Sarah is a Northwest Rare Disease Coalition board member. She's one of the board of directors at Connective Strength, an Ehlers-Danlos syndrome advocate at Rare Disease Legislative Advocates, RDLA, and Miss Wheelchair Washington USA 2022 award winner, and Miss Wheelchair USA ambassador. We also have joining us Amber Freed, who's the CEO and founder of SLC 6A1 Connect, which is an organization dedicated to discovering novel IP solutions to advance research for the patient community that they serve. And finally, Tara Britt, founder and president of the Rare Disease Innovations Institute. She's also the associate chair of the North Carolina Rare Disease Advisory Council. Welcome, esteemed panelists. I'm so pleased to be joining you. So I think we're actually going to start. Jessie, do you mind? Would you prefer to come up to give us a little overview, just to get things going?
Thank you, Max. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go quickly here because we have all of the experts right here that you need to hear from. But I wanted you to understand, what is ICD. So it stands for International Classification of Diseases. It is published by the World Health Organization, so this is an international coding system. And really, put simply, it represents the why of medical care globally. It is implemented differently in each country. So in the United States, the National Center for Health Statistics coordinates the official use. Our panel will tell you a little bit more about the process of working with that committee to try and obtain new codes. And currently, the United States uses the 10th coding system, ICD-10. However, ICD-11 was approved by the WHO in January of 2022. It's my understanding it takes almost a decade at times to get that transition to happen. But why are these codes important? They provide a common language for recording, reporting, and monitoring diseases. They allow us to compare and share data across hospitals, regions, and countries, and facilitate collection and storage of data for analysis and evidence-based decision-making.
There are a lot of folks who use these codes. As a genetic counselor by training, I fall in that healthcare provider bucket where I would pick a code when I would see someone in clinic that best described, I thought, what their why I was seeing them. That information is then also used by insurers or policymakers and patient care organizations to categorize or collect like individuals. And why are these codes important for rare disease? It matters to identify and connect patients with rare disease, improve research, measure outcomes related to those conditions, help make clinical decisions, and design payment systems that help ensure there's access to either appropriate testing or care. So in the absence of specificity around these codes, you can see how this system might fall apart. And we're going to hear today from the panelists about how that impacts our patient population and community here. So with that, I will stop and pass it back to you, Max.
I'll come join you here in a minute, but maybe Helen, I would love to hear from you a little bit about the R69 project and your work, and help us take a next step into this ICD journey, if you would.
This was inspired by a law in Serbia called Zoya's Law. And so in Serbia, if someone is undiagnosed for 6 months, doctors are legally required to send samples outside of the country to facilitate the diagnosis. At a very high level, there's a period of being undiagnosed, and then something happens. And I thought to myself, why is this not happening everywhere on this earth? And so if we were to change that, how would we go about it? And there would be some discrepancies in how you define undiagnosed. And at the same time, I was listening to Effie's Once Upon a Gene podcast and listening to Mike Graglia talk about ICD-10 codes, and I thought maybe there's an ICD-10 code that we could make that means undiagnosed. Well, fast forward to, it turns out that R69 is actually a code that already exists that means illness unspecified. And so I thought that that was a sufficient overlap in meaning between, what it says and hopefully what this community really needs as a way to designate when someone is on their diagnostic journey. And hopefully that connects them to more resources and all kinds of things. And I'll get into kind of more about what the action steps are following up, but I want to pass the mic over to hear why it's important to have some kind of designation for when you're on that journey.
Thank you so much, and you couldn't be more right. Having that ICD code makes such a difference. So my symptom onset began in high school. I know, really convenient and lovely time to have symptoms begin to start. But even though I had the most wonderful privilege of having my father's health insurance, which was great coverage, it would still take me 9 years of basically being a full-time patient and constantly going to different specialists, hearing you look fine, you look normal, everything seems to be coming back normal, before I was finally able to see a geneticist at University of Washington. And even he did not believe that I had the genetic form of this disease. And so I really, in being diagnosed, learned so much about how, what a big barrier and gap that I had in my own personal mindset. When I first began having symptoms, I would go into the ER and doctor appointments and literally apologize for taking up their time and not knowing what was wrong with me or what all of these different issues were. And it wasn't until that geneticist really connected all of the different dots of the constellation of symptoms that I had that put together a big picture of having genetic Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disease impacting collagen, which is our protein building block of our tissues, and, impacts, thank you so much, just losing things left and right, part of my clumsiness a little bit. But I've been one of the more privileged patients to have this access of care. So to know that it took me 9 years, even with this immense amount of privilege, and having all the right components in place, having family members be able to support me, having my husband work a career where he's able to be my full-time caregiver as much as possible and wash my hair and help me with dressing. Thank you, darling. And all of the things, house care, driving, transportation, cleaning, everything, and that's an unpaid position. And I have that immense privilege because I'm afforded all of that support and care and other things in place that I was even able to be a patient for 9 years to then see a geneticist to get this ICD code. And while my referring provider said that having a diagnosis would not change my care, boy, was he wrong. Because having that diagnosis enabled my insurance to say, okay, here's the access and coverage for what you need. My geneticist went above and beyond, writing a 9-page letter that really became my standard of care. What might I need in the future? Why do I need repeat surgeries? What kind of specialized surgeries I might need? And that really, we were able to take that back to Primera and say, look, this is what I need for my standard of care for my genetic diagnosis. And they were incredible working with me to individually tailor my plan to fit that standard of care. And I have to say I'm a unicorn out of the zebras because that is certainly not the typical experience of so many rare disease patients. But it was through having this initial ICD code of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that I was able to then also receive additional diagnoses of the rare diseases of mast cell activation syndrome, median arcuate ligament syndrome, vascular compression and nerve compression, and then all these other more common comorbidities like dysautonomia and postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, gastroparesis, and gosh, the list sadly goes on. But all of these different conditions, I wouldn't have been able to connect the dots without having that geneticist's initial ICD code, which led me to then these other comorbidities, ICD codes that really does help me really prove through my healthcare chart that yes, this is my real experience, and I have the documentation to prove I am the patient that I say I am. And that's one of my most powerful tools when I happen to have the misfortune of visiting the ER the one day that I meet a doctor who has no idea what EDS is and really doesn't understand what I'm there seeking care for. So it's the most important thing to be able to have that ICD code. It's a first step in being your own best advocate for yourself and for others in your patient community. And I'm actually, after Helen mentioned, I went through my medical chart and found I still have a unspecified illness diagnosis at the very, very top. So go figure, I guess it's one of the many I'll add on to the list. But it really, that's why it's so meaningful and powerful and healing for me to be a part of this panel today, because I'm so passionate that, you know, if we have an ICD code for being bitten by a duck twice, I think the 10,000 rare diseases that we know of need some more attention in getting those ICD codes so we can get the specialized care and biomedical innovation that's also needed, because once we have those diagnosed ICD code patients, that also helps the interest of pharma and patient-focused drug development and working with our federal agencies in finding more treatments and cures. So thank you all so much for your time and being here, and I'm so grateful to be a part of this panel.
Okay, my name is Amber Freed, and my son Maxwell has a rare disease named SLC6A1. We have done an incredible job of actually creating treatments for children with SLC6A1. We're repurposing a drug, we're working on a lot of precision treatments, and it occurred to me one day, oh, we need an ICD-10 code to track patients and mortality and morbidity, and what better way to do that than the Center for Disease Control right here in the United States. So 3 years ago, I applied. And it's the weirdest process. It's kind of like the Wizard in the Oz, and when they all get to the end of Oz, how there's just a man behind the curtain. And there's just like one man there, and you're like, wait a minute, I thought I was at Oz. Like there's no process, there's no way to get one. No, so it became a very big deal this year, and I became much more frustrated and confused when I found out all of the ways you can get an ICD-10 code. And up here we have some really good examples. So the person with the cow down here, that's other encounter with a cow. They have their own code. Then the person having the unfortunate encounter with that rhino, that's an encounter with a mammal, unspecified. Nick Nolte here That's bizarre personal appearance. Up there, being struck by a duck, initial encounter. And down here, this little girl, that is being struck by a duck, second encounter, subsequent encounter. So riddle me the poor person that, was attacked on the golf course and then just trying to get in the car. So while I was talking to the CDC about getting an ICD-10 code, they said, no, it's very hard to get an ICD-10 code. And I said, really? Because you have like more than 10 codes for being bitten by a shark. And I was just always under the impression that, you get bit by a shark, it swims off, you make the news that night. How does one go about it? And, every problem has a solution. So I said, okay, let's compromise here. What if I just get a duck? And before every child with SLC 6A1 goes to the doctor, I just let this duck have at it on their ankle. And let's repurpose this existing code. It's clearly the fastest way to get to where we all need to go. And they said, that's crazy. And I said, but is it? We're the ones on this Zoom right now, and we've collectively spent hundreds of hours discussing something that I brought up, the concept of repurposing an angry duck to attack children. Next slide. So these are some of the excuses I've been given. Well, doctors can barely keep up with the ICD-10 code. How in the world would they know one more code? Okay, let's just assume doctors are smart. Secondly, it's not going to improve ER care. Well, maybe it should. Because if you give our kids a very widely used epilepsy drug in the ER, you could kill them. And as a side note, a doctor from the American Academy of Pediatrics brought this up, who was an ER doctor. And I said, with all due respect, I hope you start relying on Google a little bit more than you historically have been. And then the last thing, this same doctor also took defense of why the system has been the way it has been and how it'd be so hard to change and how we actually should change medical school. And I said, okay, let's take a step back and go back to the code. And ultimately he said, well, if we give you one, we're going to have to give every rare disease a code. And I said, I actually think that's what you do here. This is the whole purpose of having an ICD-10 code. So next slide. And ultimately, I think that this doctor and the CDC have directly said, no, you are too rare to care. We are not making codes for you. It is too much work to even assign you a code. So therefore, we won't do it. And it gives me the same feeling of activism that watching what HIV and AIDS patients went through in the 80s and 90s, and cancer patients went through and have gone through to get the level of funding they're at. At what point do we just get angry and say, this is beyond the point of ridiculous? And at what point do these people's lives matter?
I think I want to continue where Amber said, when do we get angry? Unlike most of you here, I don't have rare disease in my family. I worked in gene therapy for 10 years, and that's where I encountered rare disease. I encountered people coming in. I worked for one of the world-leading gene therapists, and we would have families coming in from all over the world, often coming in to meet with us, saying, please tell us what's next. We specialized in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and all kinds of different rare diseases, and I mean, just the desperation of people coming in. We would see people coming in and they had been on the black market. They were going to go overseas. They had their wills done, and they were looking for anything that could help save their children. So that's how I got into rare disease, or got very interested in rare disease, just to help, anything we could do to help. So with that being said, one of the things that I got into policy and started working with patient advocates at that point in time, and we wrote the first legislation to create the first Rare Disease Advisory Council in the nation. And that was not my idea. It was the idea of a patient advocate, Sharon King, who had a child with Bandt disease. And then that grew, and I got really interested in rare disease policy because I thought, we can make really a change in lives through policy and legislation. And I thought, so after we passed that legislation, I got very excited. I thought, wow, what can we do really to help people, with rare diseases across the nation, not just in North Carolina, but like really help people. And so one of the first things I did, and you can tell how ignorant I was, I started reporting to the Health and Human Services Director of North Carolina. And I said, I want to see what hits North Carolina in terms of every rare disease. I don't need any HIPAA information. I just need to see what hits, which is ICD information. He says, sure, I'll get you in touch with all of my IT people. He didn't even know that you couldn't get that information. Well, after I was on a call with all the IT people in North Carolina, after they laughed at me for almost 5 minutes on the phone, I mean, literally laughed. They were like, are you kidding me? We can't give you that data. It doesn't exist. I'm like, are you kidding me? How do you budget for the state if you don't know approximately 1 million people in North Carolina? And how do you budget for the state to take care of these people if you can't identify this? So then I proceeded to call NIH and talk to the NCATS folks. They said, Tara, this information doesn't exist. I met with them. They said, why don't you talk to your Congress folks? So I, in turn, called my friend Congressman Butterfield, and we talked about it. And during the pandemic, he actually called me, and his chief of staff called me, and he said, I'm giving you the green light to form a steering committee to explore federal legislation to create an ICD code for every single rare disease. And, well, that was during, during the pandemic. I created a steering committee, and actually it was so fun. That day that I got the call, I was in my condo, the pandemic, right? I got the call, and I did a dance all the way around my condo, I was doing, it was not a pretty sight, but I did it. Anyway, so excited, and I got one of the pediatric geneticists I work with, patient advocates, my friend Crystal Davis from Texas, and a lot of patient advocates were on there, and then just people that were leading in this area. Amber's been helping quite a bit with it, and then Helen met her through Carolina with this. I mean, it's just been a very grassroots effort with people, and people have been added all through this. NIH has been a silent partner in the background, and we have drafted the federal legislation. We've added Helen's information to it, and I will tell you, it's now in some drafting areas. I'm gonna actually, as of yesterday, listening to you talk, I'm gonna actually bring it back, add your information to it, because what I heard from you yesterday was so impactful. I'm adding the information you said yesterday. You were talking about your elective surgeries. If you didn't have an ICD code, you would have to pay for that out of your own pocket.
I wouldn't have been able to happen.
So, Carolina, what you and Josh and Max putting together this, I mean, this is going to impact the federal legislation from us just all being here together and us talking about this. So, thank you all for, it makes a difference for these type of things, to happen. So with that being said, I will say Butterfield retired. He turned the federal legislation. He said, I don't know, what you did with my chief of staff, who I'm still working with, his former chief of staff, who's with a law firm, but he turned it over to Senator Klobuchar. Unfortunately, I'm just going to be very honest about this because rare disease is bipartisan. I've learned that. When I walk into the halls of Congress and I lobby, my personal opinions go out the door. It is, look, rare disease is bipartisan. You go in and it is like, you champion this. Like I don't care who you vote for or what, it is like, you just champion this. Rare disease doesn't pick a party. It goes across the board. So Klobuchar, I will just say, for 2 years, I've wasted a lot of time with that. I am now working with Tillis. He is from North Carolina. In 2 quick months, he has done more than Klobuchar's done in 2 years. I'm going to be meeting with him again in another week or 2. Helen's probably going to go with me in another couple months. Amber's probably going to go back with me to DC. Amber's been with me on the Hill. I gave her, 5 minutes notice one day when we were both on the Hill. I said, can you get with me to go on with me to the Hill? I don't like to go without a patient advocate with me. She goes, tells her story, like a 5-minute notice, literally. We were in a meeting together, and I said, I know you haven't met me before, but I need you to go with me on the Hill to lobby for this ICD legislation. She tells her story. It's amazing. So I'm going to tell you, you as advocates, your voice matters. So don't ever discount. Your voice makes a difference. Every one of your voices make a difference.
Thank you for that. Thanks. Well, we're excited to see that legislation and to get some Washington co-sponsors on the bill, for sure. You got a couple minutes left here. I thought maybe I'd put out a question just to whoever might want to answer it from the panel here, and something, Tara, that you touched on. We have a lot of experts in this room, people who are used to navigating really complex systems and facing off against and overcoming barriers that are just unconscionable. I want to turn to the panel here and ask, for patients, for family members, for caregivers, people who have been, working through the system that is not built for them. How can we, better leverage their expertise, their experiences to bring about some of this systemic change that we're hoping to create?
So one of the things that I think would be really helpful is to come together and think about ways to granularize the R69 process. So R69 as a code means illness unspecified, but in the US, it's already being used to the tune of about 4 million uses in a 3-year time frame, which was information provided by Komodo Health, which was really helpful for me to understand that essentially the waters are a little bit muddied already in terms of this code being used in a way that we do not envision it continuing forward. And so there's two things that I want to touch on. One is this ICD-10-CM official guidelines for coding and reporting. And it's a giant document, and in this document there's a section that says what to do in cases of uncertain diagnoses. And as you can see here, the language is that if the diagnosis is qualified as probable, likely, possible, ruled out, and it goes on, and then at the end it says code the condition as if it existed or was established. And in my mind, that's not sufficient to handle the cases where people are on a chronic diagnostic journey. And so what I suggested to the CDC is to code the conditions as if they're existing or established and add R69. So that's proposal number 1, and if you scan the QR code, you can. There's a website that says proposal number 1 because I expect there to be a proposal number 2, and you can sign on your support for that particular path forward. The next kind of backup plan, which I think we'll have to get into, is granularizing this in terms of having an R69.1, .2, .3 to really to really stand out from the way that it's being used right now, and really repurpose this code in a way that's meaningful in the U.S. And so if you're interested in engaging in that conversation, this is back to your point, ways that patient advocates can get involved in this is I really desperately need your voices to be heard in the creation of these subcodes, because I want to know what would have been valuable to you on your journey if you were identified in this scenario, and what are those scenarios, and how can we get those kind of codified in the R69.1s and .2s. So that's what I'll contribute to that question.
One other thing I wanted to add to, the voices are important. Please reach out to your Congress folks and talk about these ICD codes and how important it is to get this federal legislation passed. And to add something, Amber and I have talked about this so many times, and my friend Crystal Davis and I have talked about this over and over. Talking about the AIDS crisis, I talked to her about this a couple of years ago, and I said, at what point are we going to say enough is enough? And are we going to be here 4 years from now? Are we still going to be talking about this? I can remember the AIDS crisis when people went down there in busloads and they chained themselves to the Capitol. I mean, at what point are we going to be fighting and saying enough is enough? I mean, Crystal said, look, Tara, we can get busloads down here. I mean, in North Carolina this year, I'm at the point to where I'm ready. They would hear no healthcare bills. I'm at that point to do this in North Carolina, but I'm also at the point to do it, in the United States at the Capitol. This is enough is enough. This is 10% of the population. That is a large amount of people. Something needs to be done, and it's just not enough this is so important. This is why I think this coalition is so important. I was telling Carolina yesterday, and Josh and Max, I'd love to see a coalition like this in every single state. I'd love to see you do this in every state, or either regional, in all these different regions. This is a very important, to me, patient advocacy voice, and I'd love to see this voice regionally everywhere. And I'd love to see it, take an active voice in DC.
I wanted to share that please join us in advocating with Rare Across America upcoming this summer, so you can have a chance to meet with your legislators while they're here in state, in district, so we can talk about some of the legislation and policies we've been discussing today, because even if you aren't a patient, caregiver, or certainly directly impacted, even just being a provider, a payer, a community member, a friend, just anyone who's passionate about helping us, we need every stakeholder of our patient population, which includes more than patients and parents. It includes every kind of character in our community. So thank you so much, and please visit Rare Across America to register to join with us.
Your support is just sharing your stories and how important this is. It's like you don't know what you don't know. So we just have to bring awareness to all these things. And speaking to legislators is not as scary as one thinks. They're just people. So just so grateful for all these women, Max, for sharing this with us. We have the pleasure of having Rep. Ty with us today, who has been just this amazing legislator and supportive of everything that we do, and she's been championing with us in Olympia to the end, and she's just so passionate about this community, and we're just continuing to push legislation with her, and again, we're just so grateful that she took the time to be with us today, but I'll let Max kind of introduce her some more.
Representative Milan Tai is the Deputy Majority Leader of the House Democratic Caucus. She also serves on the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee, Finance Committee, and Healthcare and Wellness Committee. Rep. Tai was also the lead sponsor and our champion for House Bill 1079, which sought to ensure that low-income families with children under the age of 1 were able to access rapid whole genome sequencing when other standard tests failed to yield a diagnosis. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to your legislative champion, Representative Milan Tai. You're the prime sponsor of House Bill 1079, which, as I mentioned, sought to expand access for rapid whole genome sequencing in Washington State. I would like to just ask, as we first started...
And I failed.
Well...
we fail you. So I don't know, before he even started like the questions, I don't know. I mean, it's right, talking about speaking truth. And I think if I may, before you finish the question, Max, I'm like, I'm so sorry you have to undo a politician. I want to thank each and every one of you who have taken the time, whether you in the room today or is this hybrid?
This is, yes.
Okay. Like if you at home or if you are busy really taking care of the people whom you love, that you have taken the time to come down to Olympia, share your story, because I know how it is. It's drained, it's emotional, it's exhausting. You want to spend every hour of your energy to take care of the people who you love, and like these people who have the power to make that change. And being vulnerable. And I came in a little early so I can hear the advocacy at the federal level, and so I thank you as well for doing that work at multiple levels of government. And so if I may ask, there's another level of government that have money and power. It's at your county level. In a county, they do look at housing, they do look at healthcare. Because let's going back to local, right? We have the King County Public Health. I get it. It may sound like public health, but does it have anything to do with us? All it takes, you guys, is a mutation of a virus that would change the life of a mother, of a child. And that is really part of the conversation when we look at public health as a whole. And if we think about locally, so Seattle Children is part of the state-funded hospital, and so is UW. But did you know that Harborview Hospital is the only hospital funded by county? So I just wanted to put that out there up front. Yes, advocate at federal, because we have that code, that ICD-10. When I was in pharmacy school, it was 9. The volume was 9 volumes, and they finally updating it to 10 volume. What does it mean? It means it can change. And it changed because of us. And it changed because of the expert whom we were talking about, who in the room. I'm always nerdy and excited when I get to be in the room with scientists who do magic in their lab, because it's just absolutely amazing where we are. So my apology, finish your question.
Oh, no. I think the folks in this room are used to navigating systems that sometimes let them down, and persistence, determination, and grit, and resilience is what I've seen in this community, and what I've seen in you too, as you've been a champion for this legislation. I'd just like to ask, first, when we first started talking about this, what drew you to this issue? What drew you to this community? Why was expansion of whole genome sequencing something that you knew you wanted to carry in Olympia?
Wow, what a awesome question. You asking for my why. Well, I think what Max didn't introduce is that I am the first refugee elected to serve in Washington State Legislature. My why of being in this space and I think I sort of touch it. I'm a trained pharmacist. I graduated from University of Washington. I came here as a Vietnamese refugee in 1983. I'm not going to tell you what age I was, because you will figure out how old I am now. Not going to give you all those hints. First and foremost, let me tell you this little story, because I think it's my why. When I was a little kid, I was raised by my grandparents in this tiny little village in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. And this tiny little village does not even have a clinic. I love my grandparents, as I should, because they love me very much. They gave me their life. When my grandmother was really, really ill, all I remember, I think I was like 5, 6, my aunts and uncles like took her off to these big cities somewhere, and it felt like eternity, and she came home. And people say that if it wasn't for the doctors and the nurses, she wouldn't have been alive. And ever since then, I wanted to be a doctor, and not just any doctor. I want to be a geriatric doctor, because I believe that I can make sure no grandparents ever die, so no kids ever miss their grandparents. When I came to the United States, I didn't speak English. And as a junior in high school, my wonderful, wonderful counselor asked me, what do you want to be? Like, now you, like junior, you need to think of what you want to be. And that was when I was in the United States, in Seattle, as a matter of fact. 9 months and still learning English. And I told her I wanted to become a geriatric doctor. And she told me, change that dream. That will not happen for you. It's not possible for you. And I say, well, mind you, I was fluent in French. And my French teacher was the interpreter at the time. We, as government, did not provide interpretation. Like literally, you sing or swim or whatever, even if you swim and if you sing, too bad, so sad. I mean, that's really was a reality. And I asked her to write down what I needed to do in order to graduate on time and even have a chance of being getting the admission to University of Washington. And because I have knowledge of French, it's all Latin-based, right? So all science classes are Latin-based. I didn't need English. And we in the United States keep thinking like poor country like mine in Vietnam have absolutely no standard in education. I mean, I took to the highest level at high school at the time with trigonometry. So I did all science courses, all mathematics courses. I think the last courses required for graduation was English in those last 2 years. And I graduated with honor, we had admission to University of Washington, and then too busy advocating. Therefore, when it's come to time taking the MCAT, I get cold feet, hence pharmacy. So I told you those long story. It's seeded way long when I was that kid. It's seeded way long when it was my struggle of achieving a dream. And it's seeded way long for that deep love in science. I love science. I believe that science can change so much and make people's lives better. And so when I get to hear, I think the first bill that I heard, and people finally get to me, was PANDA, the pediatric neurological condition, that they've been trying to get a bill, at least somebody sponsoring it, and nobody even wanted to touch it. And I was like, what? Doesn't make any sense. So being one of the 2 pharmacists currently serving in state legislature, it triggered my interest, and the one thing lead to another. And I can say your community bring heart into the system I honestly felt that's created to have none. The system that's supposed to work for the people and by the people, and it should aim at improving people's life. If we don't have heart, how do we get there? How do we touch people? And so for me, the reason I'm drawn to the community and really committed to this work for 2 things, our heart and our brain. Our brain is about keep promoting and moving the scientific effort, continue learning and never stop learning, because it's possible when we keep seeking for what we think is impossible. And our brain is understanding the work that we're doing and seeking for these seemingly impossibilities is about making people's life better. That is how we do not meddle with ethics. Science is amazing when it does things for people, improving people's life. So to your question, I'm sorry it's a long, long answer, but it's seated way deep in my childhood.
Great. No, thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate that. So the House Healthcare Committee is a busy committee. Lots going on. How do you see this bill fitting into sort of the larger policy objectives that the committee is pursuing?
I think if any crowd, this crowd would be the crowd that agree with me that our healthcare system is a mess. And the way I think of it is this. Oh God, I cannot think of. Okay, so let's say we build a house. We build a house and we have this blank page. And we started, so this is healthcare system, it started being built as this. This is the dream, this is the vision. This is how we build our healthcare system. And because time go through, we learn new things, and then we add to that house. So we have new need, we have more need. So we keep building the house without taking the time to work with the architect, without taking the time to work with the engineer, without taking the time to work with the people who actually do the land survey, without taking the time to see the impact of keep building a house that just keep getting bigger and bigger and adding more room and adding more stairs. And it's become this gigantic things. And then we go, well, people keep asking, now we run out of room to add, or run out of space to add to this house. So I think to your question, that's where my headspace is. My headspace is sometime to go forward, we need to really reevaluate what currently we're having. And sometimes, in order to do that, we need to really take the time to ask ourselves what foundational and how do we build from that foundation. And sometimes, in order to build another house or rebuild the house, we need to be comfortable of deconstruct this current monster. So I think that is the case, and I think that is my current work as being introduced as the Deputy Majority Leader in the House Democratic Caucus. My job is literally doing that. My job is to sit back, learn about the system, reevaluate the system, bring my colleague into a space where we can have the discussion of truly identify what's foundational. Because here's the thing, healthcare doesn't exist in its own. Healthcare required a collaboration with education. Because we want to make sure our pre-K, the kiddos who playing with Legos, who playing with all these amazing games and tools out there, we build them the capacity of having a vision and see the future that's possible for them. Right? We want to create the kind of workforce that are visionaries. And so we want an educational system that will educate and build future leaders. We want to look at housing and transportation. I mean, right now, looking at our healthcare system, so especially for families and individuals with rare diseases, in order to seek services, how far do you have to travel? all of these systems interacting with one another. And so we have been doing that in silo. We have been building education in one end and funding it. Oh my God. Legislature is about budget, right? And we fund everything in silo, and we trained these sector to think that way. So they ended up asking for funding in silo instead of collaborative work, so that they can protect their funding from the state. So for us to be able to see ourselves as a system that's connected like a human body, if we think our heart and our lungs and our liver and our kidney is functioning in their own without the connective tissues, without the incredible building blocks that we're learning, we kid ourselves. And so I believe that my job, in order to be successful at the seemingly little ask, is really being able to ask my colleague and the people whom get elected by this community across the state. They don't need to understand what DNA is, RNA is, messenger RNA, transfer RNA. They don't need to understand how vein and arteries kind of carry oxygens and the whole exchange of carbon dioxide in the body. But what they need to understand is that similarity in connection between all the different committees that they serve on, and how do we actually communicate with one another and build the kind of system that we can see the impact of if we touch this end, how does it impact the other end?
Rep. Tanja, if you could give a letter grade to the legislature right now, just kind of assessing, general knowledge or ability to understand the issues facing the rare disease community. Where would you put them right now? Is it C, a B, or how would you kind of assess where we're at knowledge-wise with our legislators?
Very little. But that's the brain part. The success of us is the hard part. You have moved legislation last year, miles. So yes, even though my first thing to do was to apologize that we failed you, the reality is we need to celebrate the miles and the lift that this community has done. They hear you and they feel you. And I think somebody say that legislators are not scary, they are human. In fact, they are suckers. They literally suckers for story. When you come and talk to them, you call it success when you see a teardrop. Because those are the story they will remember. And you build on it, and you build on it, and you build on it. So like if you have whoever is your representative, your senator in your district, I think I can say this in here. You guys, this is the election year. Seize the opportunity. Inviting you to your community picnic. They crave it. They want to be in community. Ask them, how can I help you understand my struggle, my family struggle, my community needs? And then at some point in the conversation, being advocate as you are, ask them to please vote for a bill that's coming in front of you. And if there's anything that they don't understand, you are available for them, because guess what? You are their voter. They are trying to get your vote. And honestly, when you go back home with the ballot, all I'm asking you is please vote. I don't care who you vote for. We all have our reason and have our priorities. And I think I heard somebody say, this is not a political thing. This is not Democrat, this is not Republican, this is not Libertarian, this is just simply not. This is about our community and caring for one another. So As a Democrat, I'm not asking you to vote for Democrat. I'm asking you to simply vote, but invite a candidate who running for the election to your picnic, to your communities, build those capacity so they know who you are when you come to Olympia, right? There's first touch point, second touch point, and when you send an email, they more likely to open your email than not.
Thank you. So let's debrief on House Bill 1079 and the path forward. Can you kind of talk us a little bit through what were some of the obstacles that we faced as the bill worked its way through the legislature? And then, what do you recommend for reintroduction in 2025? How should we, think about our approach in a different way?
The first obstacle is all about money. And I hate that. But it is what it is. That's how our government system is created, right? Legislative is all about budgeting. Executive is all about implementing, using those money to implement. So the first barrier is the money, and I want to call a shout out to the people who represent you, Rose in the back and Max in the front. They work really hard, you guys. I didn't mind Rose bug me because I enjoy hanging out with her, but like a lot of my colleague was not appreciative with being bugged by me through Rose. So I think they've done an incredible job by getting the fiscal note for the bill to where it should be, because it, and I think 2025 is an opportunity to retell our story, to see it as brand new. Because legislators, just like many of us, are a creature of habit. When they seen the first bill, that's all they remember. When they seen that first fiscal note, that's all they remember. Even though if there are changes, they don't remember anything else. So build it, make it newer. And the second thing is that you've done it. You start telling your story. Keep telling your story. And really the last thing is, next year, Washington State, I'm curious about North Carolina. It sounds like your state is messed up. Anyway, in Washington State, we're gonna have new governor, opportunity. We're gonna have new insurance commissioner, opportunity. We're gonna have a brand new, God knows who's in the Senate and who's in the House, opportunities. We always need to seize these as opportunity to retell our stories, and I think that is how we are going to move one step at a time.
Any final thoughts here for this community about, how you see the opportunity for real change to happen in the next session? What should we kind of close with, keeping in mind as we look forward to the path ahead?
Thank you. So if Rose and Max doesn't tell you, apparently, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, the Senate come out with a in the red budget shortfall between $8 million to $12 million. I'm doing my politicians again. My apologies, but I need you. I need you because between the 8 million and 12 million here are two biggest thing that is gonna be in your ballot. And if you vote for anything, please consider these two things. One is the Climate Commitment Act that's on the ballot. That carbon trade, that dollars is used to fund transportation. It used to fund a lot of things that we found impacting by climate and by carbon footprint. It passed the legislation, the initiative is to repeal it. So the thing between 8 million and 12 million budget shortfall is if the public decide to repeal it, our in the red is gonna be bigger. And please know me, I hate sounding like scary cat. I hate stuff that's just coming out my mouth too. But that is the reality. And the second one is capital gain tax. Capital gain tax was passed to use that dollars for childcare, to use that dollars to help boost public education. And so when those, and then as you know, public education in our state sit in constitution. So constitutionally, the legislature is obligated to fund public education, and we are not even near amply fund public education. So if capital gain tax go down, our budget shortfall is gonna be gigantic. And the chance for us to move this into space is less likely. So that's the reality that we're looking at. I am asking, there's one more on the ballot. That is also about healthcare, but it doesn't impact the budget funding, the general budget funding in general. It impacts our own well-being, so I'm not gonna talk about it, but I did. So if anything, please do not repeal Climate Commitment Act. Please do not repeal cap gain. And if you want a deeper conversation about my ask, I'm happy to open and have that conversation with you. Thank you.
All right. Well, one more round of applause, please, for Representative Milan Tai. Thank you for being our champion in Olympia. I know.
Yeah, and I'm hoping like until session you have more champion, like the entire legislature.
We'll keep working on it.
Keep working on it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me a chance.
I also just want to thank Rep. Tai because she's just so authentic and she makes it not seem as scary. She's funny and I think that just really helps to point out that doesn't have to be a scary thing and that you really can make so much change through legislation. Just by sharing your stories, you can really have so much impact. So now I'd like to bring the next panel up. We have Siobhan Keel, Chelsea Olson, and Tracy Bradley. So they're going to be talking about the multidisciplinary approach to rare disease, a few cases of solved diagnostic odyssey. And so we're grateful to have you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us here. I'm Chelsea Olson. I'm one of the nurses at Seattle Children's Hospital in the hematology department, and we're here today to talk about the multidisciplinary approach to rare diseases. And I've got Tracy Bradley, who's our nurse practitioner. Do you want to talk about yourself? No. And then Dr. Keel is our partner at the Fred Hutch.
Hello, everyone. I'm a little bit maybe of a different sort here. I'm on the adult side, and kind of the program that we run is a combination, a partnership between Seattle Children's and the Fred Hutch Cancer Center. And so individuals might first come into our program on the pediatric side, and then a big challenge that folks are likely aware of is how do you transition care from a pediatric setting to an adult setting? And I'm sort of the landing spot for these particular disorders that we're going to talk about, which are inherited bone marrow failure and risks for developing cancers of the blood.
So we just have land and labor acknowledgements that we wanted to share, and then we have no disclosures.
And I'm Tracy Bradley. I'm the nurse practitioner with the hematology team, and specifically here representing the marrow failure team that oversees care of children at Children's. First, I just want to say I'm humbled to be here. I feel like a little bit in the presence of a lot of experts, and so know that your knowledge base far exceeds ours in many ways, and we just want to share with you our work and how we do it and how we work together as a team. So children often come to us as perhaps the first members of a family diagnosed with a rare disease, and we get to know families this way. We provide family-centered care at Children's, which many of you probably already know this, which means that the child's cared for in the context of the family, which is largely the parents who are the ones who know their child best. And again, we're humbled to know that the parents are the experts on their child and are their greatest advocates. So to do this, we sort of developed an informal presentation of some fictional cases that gives some representation of our work. And again, it's just kind of skimming the surface. So our first patient that we wanted to bring to is Aaron. Is 4 years old. He came to our care because he was identified by the pediatrician to have poor growth and some skeletal differences, and was referred to the craniofacial team at Children's. And so again, we only represent one of the subspecialties at Children's. When a child is found to have a marrow failure disorder, which Max did. He had Fanconi's anemia, and which is not only an anemia, it's a bit of a misnomer of a name, but the marrow failure team does become their subspecialist medical home, so to speak. And we become the ones who oversee all of the diagnosis and monitoring of a patient like Max. I think that's all I wanted to say about him.
So to just provide a quick definition, marrow failure, in case not everybody is familiar with that, means that your bone marrow, for some reason or another, is not functioning properly and making either red blood cells, white blood cells, all three, just one, who knows. And there's different stages of that, and so we primarily deal with the inherited marrow failures or genetic causes in our team. And part of that is on the slide behind me, the pediatric multidisciplinary team. We feel really strongly that different roles have different parts to play, and everyone brings something really essential to the approach and care for these families. And to start with, we have the providers. We have Dr. Amy Geddes, who is our physician, and then Tracy Bradley, the nurse practitioner. They meet with our new diagnoses to help facilitate all their care, are available to talk about them and see them on an annual and as needed basis. There's myself, Chelsea, I'm the nurse coordinator. I do a lot of the day-to-day care. I'm the person people talk to on the phone, triaging their health needs. I think you should come in and get labs sooner than we had talked about. I answer my chart messages, and I help just kind of coordinate things between different specialties. And I do a lot of patient education, and if we have time at the end, I'll give you a hint of what that tastes like, but that's my favorite part, when I go in at the end of the visit and wake up the teenager and say, okay, what did we just talk about? It's time for a quiz. Don't worry, you're gonna pass. And then we have our child life specialists. They are just, I wanted to highlight, they're just an integral part of anything at Seattle Children's. They are the friendliest, happiest people that help children and families cope with painful procedures and cope with this new normal. They're part of just really normalizing things. And we are so appreciative of their care and love that they are there for our patients. And then the rest of our multidisciplinary team, we have our dietitian, who helps a lot of patients come to the marrow failure clinic for poor growth. That's one of the first things that pediatricians look at. And if a kid's not growing well, then we can start to delve into why they're not growing well, which can be many reasons. But part of that is we want a dietitian to optimize nutrition for these patients and make sure we're doing everything we can from that end. And Garrett's incredibly passionate about nutrition with our patients. We have a social worker who meets with our new diagnoses and annual visits, and then as needed to help with financial and social stressors, and also can help facilitate communication with school to make sure that schools are providing all the needed accommodations for our patients. And she's also very passionate about that. Our genetic counselor, Katie Bergstrom, is kind of just really essential in helping getting that diagnosis, that genetic diagnosis, not only for the patient, but then facilitating parents to get diagnosed and other siblings. And if we have a suspicion that a parent needs to be diagnosed, and then we refer them to Dr. Keel to take over, and we have diagnosed several people this way. And she's also really Katie Bergstrom's also helps with family planning if people want to have more children and how to avoid having another diagnosis in the family. So she's been great with that. And then last but not least, we have a psychologist on our team who meets with our families at their annual visits to help just kind of evaluate the chronic mental health stress with having a lifelong diagnosis that people deal with day in and day out. And so she's available if they need to meet with her for therapy or to help find them community resources. And we're just so lucky to have her. And so this is our multidisciplinary team, and then we meet as a group for the annual visits for these patients. We call them the comprehensive visits because we're just really like looking at every piece in their care. What do we need to do? Where can we improve? What can we make sure we're doing everything possible for these patients while we're seeing them?
Which brings us to closing in on Erin, who our team would be involved with doing all the upfront diagnostics and making a further plan of care, many of which things are based on standards that we would use for care, but also individualized care for Aaron and his family, depending on things like where they live, how difficult it is to get to children's, how to coordinate care with outside communities, and setting up things like telemed visits, where to get labs done for them, and really working individually with the family and the child, but also making sure that we're meeting the standards of care and giving them the highest level of care that we can. And that said, we like to provide an annual comprehensive clinic with our marrow failure patients, most of which are seen annually, and the team sees them sequentially in a single visit during the day. Some are done telemed, some are done in person. And the team that Chelsea has just introduced you to will all meet with the patient on that day.
So just to highlight our partnership with our adult team, I want to talk about Bridget, who is another patient, fictional patient. So Bridget is a 20-year-old college student who's received blood transfusions at Children's for her whole life. She was previously treated with growth hormone and managed with pediatric endocrinology, and that's just to say a lot of our patients, we might be their medical home for their inherited marrow failure, but they see lots of different subspecialties at the hospital, and so we kind of have to make sure we're looping everybody in if we're doing big care changes and taking into account all the different things that might be happening. Bridget also has a portacath. She has venous access issues and has had a portacath for years, and hers is tilted really funny, and she would like a new one before she transitions to an adult hematology. So we have to coordinate with surgery and make sure that, you know, the place she's going to is able to accommodate and has staff trained to access like a portacath or a venous access device. So she fortunately is going to school at UW, so we can see her until she's 21 and then transition her off to Dr. Keel, which is great. But if we have other families that go to other, you know, they're going to school out of state, we talk about when would we transition you to an adult provider? Would it be at 18 if you're going to school on the East Coast, or will we see you until you're 21? So it all depends on the patient-family situation. But we have, fortunately, we're so fortunate to have the great team we have here. And I think I just wanted to highlight too, we also have an adolescent and young adult program within the CBDC, the Cancer and Blood Disorder Clinic. That includes fertility. So if we ever needed to, you know, talk about bone marrow transplant for a patient, fertility is a big part of that. So we have a lot of great programs.
That's a nice segue into bringing Dr. Keel in to talk about our relationship with the Fred Hutch and how we do have some overlap. And I think everyone's heard the great Seattle Cancer Care Alliance term, and so this is an umbrella of that.
Yeah, so I'm also delighted to be here. And Chelsea and Tracy kind of gave an overview of the structure of their clinic. And so we have an analogous structure on the adult side, minus the child life. We don't have any people organizing games or activities for the kids on the Hutch side. But we also have a dietitian, a nurse, and a geneticist. And my clinic is structured kind of two ways. One, we have a monthly genetics clinic that is really a diagnostic clinic. And what I would highlight is we kind of serve two purposes. One is the transition of care of folks who present with their disorders on the pediatric side. And then I want to highlight that there are folks that have rare disorders that go a lifetime. And I'll kind of share a story at the end that go a lifetime without a diagnosis. And they might come to an adult clinic. And I think that's oftentimes, I'm speaking to the choir a bit, that's oftentimes on the adult side there's a bias that if somebody had something inherited, wouldn't that have been identified in a pediatric setting? And that just isn't the case. We actually now recognize in our disorders that among patients, for example, that present with myelodysplastic syndrome, a cancer of the bone marrow, probably around 5 to 6% of those individuals harbor an underlying inherited cancer predisposition. And so that's to highlight that there's kind of the importance of transition of care, and there is still a diagnostic approach on the adult side. And so there were a few things that I wanted to highlight. One was the concept of transition of care, and kind of how I've broadly thought of it is the care structure over at Seattle Children's is wonderful, and it tends to be a family-centered care structure. And I think a big thing for us on the adult side is we really value autonomy. That is how medicine on the adult side was developed, that a person is an individual, they have individual choices about their care. And I think both models are wonderful, but it can be a little jarring for individuals and families to move from one structure where the whole system is sort of to help with families, make sure people can get to their appointments, make sure there's parking that's easily available. And then you come over, and I hate to use the dark side, but sometimes that's the way people feel. They come to the adult setting, and it's difficult to navigate the parking lot even. It's difficult to say, gosh, how do I get coverage to watch my other kids at home? And we're really trying to kind of meld the two. And I think on both sides, there's opportunities to make that transition better. And so one of the things that we've done in our program is I try twice yearly or so to come over to one of their comprehensive clinics to ease that transition. And I'm there largely to meet patients and families, to know where they will land when they come over to the adult setting. And then I think the other piece is these guys are doing a wonderful job as people approach the time of transition to say, okay, wait, this person who is now 17 or 18, maybe they should start being seen alone with their parent, maybe in the waiting room, so that they get used to talking to the provider, that they develop a sense of autonomy for their care. Because I think a lot of things that I see on the adult side is sometimes patients are lost to follow-up, and I think that is in part on the provider side, that we don't have necessarily a system that is as easy to contact patients or keep patients in the loop. And I think that patients sometimes haven't developed as optimal a skill set as they can, and we can help to do that. And I think programmatically that's been one of our goals. The second piece, I wanted to just give a broad sense to the audience of the diseases and diagnoses that we're seeing. And so we use this term marrow failure, and it sounds almost judgmental. It's not that anybody is a failure. It's that the bone marrow doesn't make blood cells in a way that keeps their blood cells normal. And that can be a problem that leads to cancer of the bone marrow or not, that just leads to a need to get transfusions of red cells or platelets, or that they're at risk for infection. And depending on these disorders, they can be associated with a myriad of other findings. Cancer predisposition that's not just in the bone marrow. They might be at risk for breast or prostate cancer. Some of these syndromes can have other non-cancer manifestations, lung disease or liver disease. And so we really partner on the adult side, just as on the children's side, with our colleagues in endocrine, our colleagues in the pulmonary service, our colleagues in the renal service, to make sure that the patients get care in all of these subspecialties. They're important to recognize for a number of reasons. One is we're thoughtful about surveillance over time. What are the other risks that what are the other healthcare risks that they're facing? And then kind of a unique thing about the importance of the diagnosis on our side is because some of these lead to cancers of the bone marrow, we have patients that develop leukemia. And as part of their care, a bone marrow transplant is a consideration. And when we think about doing a bone marrow transplant in an individual, the first thing we think about is, well, who's going to be the donor? And oftentimes the optimal donor might be a sibling who's closely matched to that individual. And so the recognition of an inherited disorder among the family is particularly or kind of uniquely important in these inherited bone marrow failure syndromes because some of these individuals might need transplant. And we're thoughtful that we wouldn't want to use a sibling donor or a related donor that harbors the same genetic change that could lead to a problem in the recipient. And so that's kind of a unique challenge that we have on the adult side. And there are ways that we try and facilitate a genetic diagnosis. And so along with our partners on the pediatric side, on our adult side, we have a geneticist and a genetic counselor that sees patients. And in our heme malignancy genetics clinic, we've opened in 2018, and we've seen over 200 families in individuals now since we initially opened. And we recently just looked back retrospectively and said, gosh, okay, when folks came to us, they came to us for a variety of reasons. They might come to us because it's the parent of a pediatric patient that's seen over on the children's side. And the question is, does the mom or dad or adult brother or sister harbor the same inherited disorder? Or they might be a new presentation to us on the adult side. And among those individuals, when we send genetic testing, and I know you guys have had a lot of discussions on genetic testing and the results of those. Our testing, when we look back, our hit rate for making a diagnosis when individuals came to see us was pretty good and kind of similar across, if you look in other settings where genetic testing has been broadly implemented, what's the incidence that you actually identify an underlying inherited cause? And our hit rate is around 20-25%. And I think that's kind of wonderful. There are families and individuals that didn't have a diagnosis before and that we've identified. And that's helped us to really tailor their care. So maybe what I'll close with is these folks highlighted a nice idea of how patients present on the pediatric side. I really want to highlight that rare disorders also present to adult patients, and it matters. And so the case that comes to mind was a young woman who came to our clinic. I'll kind of won't give any details, but this person had had a lifetime since she was about 11 years old of diarrhea, of having lung problems, and having low blood counts because of an autoimmune low blood counts. And she'd seen various providers. She'd seen endocrinologists, she'd seen rheumatologists, and been treated with a number of different immune suppressive medications, kind of with variable results in terms of improving her colitis, her GI symptoms, her pulmonary symptoms. And we were able to see her and test her on a broad targeted capture panel, a broad genetic screen for inherited reasons that folks have immune deficiencies. They used to be called primary immune deficiency syndromes, or inborn errors of immunity is the term we use now. And this individual had a mutation in a gene that is involved in regulating T cells, part of your immune system. And it turned out that the diagnosis had an absolute specific therapy targeting exactly the protein she was missing. And this is a little bit of an extreme example. That doesn't always happen, that there is such a targeted therapy for a person's genetic diagnosis. But to me, it kind of highlights that is possible in some settings, and it's also the hope of why we are trying to do genetic diagnoses is, in this case, you literally couldn't have gotten more targeted therapy. This was exactly the protein, CTLA-4 deficiency. Person was missing a soluble, or a protein that regulates T cells, and that soluble protein was available, developed for a totally different reason, and this person really benefited from that. So I think the messages that I'll kind of send home is what we're trying to accomplish together with our partners on children is this concept of lifelong care, and that individuals have different challenges at different points in their life that have rare disorders. In our case, it's inherited marrow failure disorders. Two, that these disorders can present in adult settings. It's not always that folks have rare disease and they're identified or diagnosed as children. And then 3, that really our role as providers is to partner to optimize people's health. That's why we're here. So really a delight to be here with you all.
Just to quickly say,
Yeah.
I hold Adulting 101 classes with our teenage patients, and I have a giant insurance card, and I quiz them on what the things on the insurance card are, and I have a pill bottle, and I say, who calls for your refills? You need to call for your refills. Here's how to read a prescription bottle. So we try to prep them, but it's hard. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I think these families are so lucky to have you guys. So, and that's the thing, I think, in being at Children's with our daughter, I feel like she feels like she's a queen there. Like, you guys just make it if you can make a hospital feel like a place where a kid wants to go to and looks forward to, and that's what you guys do, that's something you can't take for granted. That is just so special. And you're right, with the transition, a lot of our families, it's a lifelong thing. And so it's that transition, it's like you're a queen, and then you're like, then now what do we do? And these families already have to go through so much in coordination that it is a hard transition. And it is, when you're trying to survive, it's hard to think about trying to coordinate as well. It's, you just want someone to do that for you. So just so appreciate all your work, and thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. I'll let you guys applaud again. Sorry, I interrupted that. Oh, you have a question? Yes.
What you guys do in your department, have you guys ever thought about coordinating and teaching other departments to do this? And the reason why I ask that is because I am a family that's been at Seattle Children's forever. I do have 2 kids who are rare, who don't get this at all. Everything you're doing, I'm doing. And so I'm wondering, how do I get that for my kids, but not only just for mine, for the other 4 that are now following mine, because I've already built that portion or that team. And we have a specialized team specific for that disease, but I have been to hematology multiple times with our daughter, same thing, low white blood count, can't tell us why. But it took 16 years to find out she had a rare disease. So I'm just trying to figure out, is there any more workings of trying to teach other departments to do the same thing, that if it doesn't have anything to do with cancer or anything that has to do with the bone marrow portion? And then my second part would be, same thing, that transition. I've transitioned our kiddo to UW, and that experience is definitely not the same. Let alone 23, but 12-year-old more mind going into the adult world is huge. But I'm the one coordinating that care on both sides, and it's just extremely taxing times 2. So I'm just wondering, can we talk? Can we meet up at Children's, and I can get your team with my team? Just even down to, you were talking about mental health, right? They've been diagnosed, they're in their teens, they're 18 and 20, but I can't get a mental health therapist to come and see them or be with them because they technically don't fit in that department. But we're in that department, if that makes sense.
It does. Mental health, that's a big push. So we were thrilled when we finally got someone. We didn't, to start with, when I first started doing this position, it's been almost 8-9 years. We didn't have a dedicated social worker for our team, so it's been a lot of really advocating and saying, this family didn't have X, Y, and Z because we didn't have a social worker, and that's not acceptable. And so it's been a long road to get the team that we have now. So I don't know how to speak for other specialties at the hospital, but to say the same hard process to fight and say, we really do need the budget for a social worker. We really do need the budget for a geneticist. We really do need the child life we used to have. When I first started in HEMONC, 13 years ago at Children's, we had 1 child life specialist. Now we have 4. That's amazing. And that only happened because everybody complained and advocated. And so just that tireless e-feedbacks and complaining with Children's, fill out the comment cards on the website. And then finding kind of the administrative leaders to help champion some of this. And I think part of why we had success is one of the division heads really sat down, was willing to take the time and listen to us and say, like, you're right, we do need more of this. And how can I advocate for that within the program as the division head?
I would say, you guys, I don't want to say we figured everything out first. That, I think it's a process. But I think one of the things that I learned through this, first I learned that pediatricians are extraordinarily nice. I'm an adult doc, and I was like, they're so lovely. It's wonderful. It's wonderful working with pediatricians. I can't believe it. It's very different on the adult side. I mean, my colleagues, we even interact with one another differently. But I think one of the things that I would say, and people have talked about this, what are kind of the keys to making transition from a family-centered environment to a more autonomy one? And there are a few, I think, and one I do think is this kind of concept of a medical home. And it doesn't have to be necessarily on the adult side with a hematologist. It kind of depending on what the disorder is. I think that what I've thought was part of our success in the successes that we've had is that we identified individuals. And so Dr. Geddes is just a wonderful person on the ped side in your team. And then for her to have me as a person on the adult side, it is a little homegrown. It's like there's a person there. And I think that's one thing that can be helpful. And then the other thing that I would say, and I don't have an answer to this, but it's just I'm highlighting a challenge on the adult side that I didn't appreciate until we really started transitioning more people, is there's just this administrative thing of the insurance. Like, this is the insurance coverage over at this particular institution, and now you're coming to another institution. And sorting that out like a long time ahead of time, I think is helpful, because that was a surprise to me, that just as a kind of functional problem that comes up.
I hope that helped. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
I have one question. There's so much tension in the... Hi. Okay, there is just so much tension in the system against payers, against hospitals, trying to communicate within doctors. Do you see any low-hanging fruit that us as advocates can do to improve care and get people on the same page or prearrange something?
Do you mean with like insurance coverage, or I just want to understand?
I intentionally left the questions so open-ended for just something that you guys think we could do better, communicate better, maybe take some stress off of you so that you can do things that are important.
It'd be really nice to have IV iron covered by insurance companies.
I think we're coming at this from the, child, adolescent, young adult perspective, and I'm not entirely certain of the whole audience here, but I think asking for what you need, like you are from your teams, and continuing to do that, and continuing, if you're a parent, advocating for your child, but also helping your child ask for what they need. And that would be, for us, helping them understand the system, continuing to reinforce that is kind of the homegrown concept that Dr. Keel talks about, and working together as a team. So we don't consider, we consider the family and the child the integral member and decision-making folks on our team. So.
They're just a kind of functional thing. Here, it's there. You guys probably know this in your electronic medical record, kind of with almost many institutions, I don't know what the percentage is, are on some version of EPIC. That's the electronic medical record. And it has a functionality that's called Care Everywhere. You guys probably know about that. That's essentially the idea is that your electronic medical record could be available to other systems that are on EPIC, but I don't know all the intricacies of which ones are linked to which ones, and it's not as seamless as you might think it is, that I would have thought it was with an electronic medical record. And so getting records from the transition period, when you go from the peds to the adult side, that can be really helpful, and that can be just advocating that the docs have decent notes, that the details of a person's story is there. And we're lucky because the Seattle Children's is accessible to us, but I don't think that's true for many institutions.
Okay, so we're moving forward with improving diagnosis with the awesome power of yeast genetics. And so I would love to welcome Amy Dudley. She is a PhD in Pacific Northwest Research Institute, senior investigator and interim co-chief scientist officer. And so I'm so excited for you guys to learn some things from her. Thank you.
So I'd really like to thank you all for inviting me. It is a privilege to be here. It is a privilege to be able to hear from great kids like Mason and Willow. And it is a privilege to be in front of so many rare disease families, rare disease moms. You guys are what is going to turn around the attitudes towards science, and you really inspire us. So it's a pleasure to be here to tell you about some of my lab's work using the awesome power of yeast genetics to improve diagnostics. Somebody did a disclaimer, so the only relevant disclaimer I have is that my lab does receive sponsored research funding from Moderna, and Moderna is developing gene therapy for a particular rare disease that we work on. So first I'd like to introduce my lab and the type of research that we do. So many of you, when you think about, research, scientific research, you're probably thinking about clinical research. We're not those kinds of doctors. We're those kinds of doctors. My lab is, we study genetics and genomics at the bench, and we are experts in developing high throughput technologies is one of the main things that we do. And so one of the things about kind of going into these rare disease projects is I've learned a lot. And so in my world, I really love being in this community. Siobhan was kind of alluding to, the world that I live in is not a kind, forgiving kind of environment a lot of the time, but pediatricians are wonderful people. They are lovely. My collaborator, Andrea Grotman at Children's National Hospital, is one of them. In my world, the way I'm evaluated is we develop a new technology, we apply it in high throughput, we publish papers, we go to conferences, and everybody pats me on the back and they say, "That's great, Amy, that is a great technology. You guys did a really big experiment. That is so impressive." And that's success. When we started working on some of the rare disease projects that we've worked on, Tanja, you gave a lovely introduction to the urea cycle disorders, so that's one of them, and this is part of the project that we work on together with Andrea and some of her colleagues at Children's National. It seems like, it would be really good to interact with clinicians, right? And that's kind of an obvious thing. Clinicians know a lot about the disease, and they're going to, help us interpret our data, our technological data in the context of this disease. We started working with Andrea over 3 years ago. It's probably almost 4 years ago now. And it's obvious, right, that technologists should be working with clinicians. And we get a lot out of working with each other. So Andrea and her colleagues, they're on that call every 2 weeks for 4 years. And the reason they are is because we are developing data sets and new technologies that are really going to benefit their patients. And we're getting a lot out of it as well, of course. And there's a third piece to this too, which is the patient advocacy. And, kind of along the lines of hopefully being respectful, but being honest, for someone like me, it seems like the patient advocacy voice and the patient experience should be important somehow, but it's not clear to me, clear to scientists like me, how that would actually benefit the science, right? It seems inspiring and it's rewarding, and that's all great. But my people already work really hard, and it's great that they feel inspired, and it's really wonderful to be able to have that interaction as we now do with certain patient advocates. But it wasn't clear to me exactly how it was going to drive the science forward, and boy, was I wrong. I know you all know this, but it is surprising to bench scientists that you as, for example, the families, you are scientists all day long, every day. You're making observations, you're doing experiments, right? This thing works, that doesn't work, this happened, and you are observing really important clinical features. And I know you all know this, but that's surprising to someone like me. And so that has really driven the science forward, and I want to have time to tell you a little bit about the science. So I'll just tell you that, many of the diseases that my lab focuses on for technological reasons are the types of diseases that qualify for those newborn screening types of diseases, right? So they are generally rare, serious, treatable, and appear in either the newborn period or in childhood. The urea cycle disorders, which you've heard a little bit about already, we have a project together with Andrea Grotman and her colleagues that is working on applying our technology to better understand and to help the diagnosis of urea cycle disorders. The first one that we did was OTC deficiency, which is the most common of the urea cycle disorders. And so in the case of really severe OTC deficiency, as an example, these are infants who appear healthy at birth. However, very shortly afterwards, ammonia increases in their blood and their brain. The first symptoms are loss of appetite and vomiting, usually lethargy. And then if something isn't done very, very quickly, ammonia continues to build up in the brain, and they experience brain swelling, seizures, coma. And unfortunately, for the infants who have this really severe form of the disease, 40% of them, unfortunately, will pass away in the neonatal period. So really important to diagnose this quickly and do something about it quickly. How can we help to give faster and more informative diagnoses? So first, I need to tell you just a little bit about genetics, and it's going to be a very little bit about genetics. So you guys all may be experts in this, but just to get us all on the same page, each of our genomes is like a really long book of those GATC letters, and there are 6 billion of them. And I like to think about it as an instruction manual for how to build and operate a human, okay? And so, as you know, if parts of that go wrong, if there are these spelling errors in the genetic code, those can cause genetic diseases. So all you need to know about these particular genetic changes is that some of them are harmless, some of them can cause disease, but for the vast majority of them, we'd have no idea, okay? And the scale of this problem is enormous. So of the type of genetic changes that my lab focuses on, there are 60 million of them that can arise in the human population. And again, for almost 60 million of them, those are currently these variants of uncertain significance, which are the ones where we don't know whether or not they cause disease or they're harmless. And importantly, they can't be used to make a diagnosis, and they can't be used to initiate treatment, okay? So these variants of uncertain significance are the bane of existence for they're frustrating and confusing for families, they're frustrating for physicians, and they're a huge problem. So let's take an example of one urea cycle gene, the first one that we started focusing on, which is ODYSSEY. So they're of the kind of mutations, of the kinds of genetic variants that we study. There are about 2,000 of them that we don't know which of them cause disease and which of them don't. We can test them all, but we can't do it in humans. And so enter the awesome power of yeast genetics. And so my lab works on yeast for a number of different reasons. The major reasons are that you can work with it really easily. You can genetically engineer it at will. You can do experiments better, faster, cheaper in a lot of cases. And for example, we can, in the matter of a month and for, kind of a small, maybe, I don't know, few $100s, do what would take 6 months to a year and $30,000 to do in a mouse. So this has a lot of potential, and yeast is also a really high throughput system. So we can assay, we can do experiments, and we can test things at really large scales and in really high throughput. Okay, but we don't want to test yeast genes. Actually, sometimes my lab does want to test yeast genes. But for the purpose of these projects, what we want to do is we want to use yeast, all the benefits of yeast, but test human variants. So the other reason why you should all care about the awesome power of yeast genetics is that very often processes that are so important for our human cells that they cause severe disease of the kind that we're talking about, those processes are so important that they perform the same function not only in a human cell, but also in a yeast cell. So these are processes that many living cells, many living systems actually use. And so they are the same, essentially, in human cells and yeast cells. And in fact, they're so similar that we can actually often take the human protein coding sequence and we can put it into a yeast cell, and it will be able to functionally replace the loss of its yeast counterpart. So for example, we take the yeast genome and we chop out the gene that we're interested in studying. And then we take a synthetic piece of DNA. So we're not taking any material from a person. We order these, we take a computer, we design the human gene in the computer. We send off the order to Twist Biosciences, and they send us back a tube with a piece of synthetic DNA. We take that piece of DNA, and this is kind of along the lines of kind of how quickly we can do this. Day one, we receive the DNA from a company. Day two, we make multiple copies of it. We amplify enough material. Day three, we put it into yeast. Day five, we have yeast cells that actually have this human gene inside the yeast. And day six, we're already doing our experiment. So we can do this really, really quickly and easily. Let's see. Oh, good. That didn't shut the whole thing off. So when this actually works, now we have an assay, we have a test for how well the human gene works in yeast. So let's say that when I have the yeast gene in yeast, it works at 100%. Now when I put the human gene in, sometimes it works at 100%, sometimes it works at 95%. That's good enough, okay? But when I didn't have the gene at all, it's not working at all, right? So now we have a range from 0%, where there's no function of the enzyme, let's say, to 100%, where that enzyme is working in as well as it would in a healthy person, okay? So that's the range. So now what we can do is to put in not only the version of the gene, we call that the wild type version of the gene, the healthy version that most people have in their genomes, and now we can put in known disease-causing variants, as well as known variants that are what are called benign, so variants that are just, there are spelling changes, but those actually don't cause any problem, right? So we have a disease-causing version and a healthy but different version, and we put them in, and we might see differences. So this tells us, as long as this agrees with the disease annotation, right? So known disease-causing diseases have known disease-causing variants have low activity, and known benign variants have high activity. This assay is looking great. So now what we can do is we can test thousands of these, and we can do them quickly, cheaply, and easily. And what we've found when we've done a study on OTC deficiency and a couple of other urea cycle disorders is that we can now, by comparing the results of our yeast tests to the results of known human disease genes, we've found that we can define a range in which, at the very, very low end, these are where we would expect the most severe forms of the disease, and we see that agreement. At the high end, we don't expect to see disease in people, and that's what we see. And then there are individuals whose variants have something in between, okay? And so this is a quantitative assay that is really can be used as functional information, as one piece of information that physicians are now, and physicians, patients, and their families can use to help make decisions, integrated with all of the other things that we're already using to make decisions. In the case of our OTC project, where this has now been published in a peer-reviewed journal article, these data have been evaluated before what's called a variant VSEP committee, so a variant curation expert panel. Those panels have looked at our data sets and have evaluated and have decided how they're going to weigh that information in addition to all the other information that they use. And so this is being used in practice by physicians, including Andrea and her colleagues and the people who she is called on to consult for when one of these rare patients is born in the US or around the world to help make decisions that guide care and treatment. Okay, so couple of other issues to just leave you with. So the first is that although we have now shown very good agreement between our data and known disease variants, Russell and my lab assayed 1,570 variants, but over 1,300 of those have actually never been seen in a patient, or there's no patient data in the literature, right? So there are a large number of variants that people have not seen before, but that are likely to show up in a person at some point. In fact, it is likely that every one of these variants is probably in a living person somewhere on the globe right now. But 430 of those are of that class that are expected to cause the most severe form of the disease, those that show up in the newborn period. Okay, so that's a large number of these, and they're the most difficult ones for genetic counselors to work with are the variants that nobody has ever described before. Okay, so what does this all mean? So it means that these are the difficult ones, and that there are a large number of them that have the potential to cause severe disease. The other thing that is something that is obvious to me, but I guess I never really thought about how important it might be in the context of some of the rare disease community, is that so these types of experiments where we do comprehensive studies of all variants across the full length of a protein, across the full length of a gene, these are called, we call these mutational scans. And some of you may be working, you may have mutations in a gene that's not terribly well understood, right? OTC is really well understood because it is part of core metabolism. People have known about this disease for a very long time, and it's very well studied. If you have a protein that is less well studied, where the function of it isn't terribly well known, at the end of doing one of these mutational scans of that protein, we know a lot about what we call the structure function of that So we know a lot more just about that protein generally once this new kind of technology, and my lab's not the only lab that's doing this. There's actually a great community of researchers in the Seattle area who are doing these types of mutational scanning. And so this is a new technology that I'd like to make you aware of, and it's really powerful, and it provides a lot of information, not only about diagnosis, but also just about the function of this protein that's needed to move the science forward and needed to move science that is going to help develop treatments and cures. So with that, I'd first like to thank all of the patients and families who participate in this really critical aspect of clinical research that we depend on. I'd like to thank the members of my lab at the Pacific Northwest Research Institute here in Seattle, who work really hard and who are really inspired by all of you. Our collaborators at Children's National Hospital, including Andrea Grotman and Nick Amu, who are rare disease physicians who oversee the care of about 100 patients with urea cycle disorders and also other disorders. I'd like to thank the funding, and I'd like to thank all of you for inviting me.
So thank you so much for that and for improving the diagnosis for our rare disease patients, Amy. And I just love their work and working with this lab because they also bring you to show you the lab, and it is pretty cool, like the technology that they have there and how they do it. And I mean, the fact that it's high scale and low cost, but it's also just really cool to be able to experience that. And they're very good about bringing patients and our families to experience that, and they're always doing educational things and getting our families involved, which I think is pretty awesome. So I'm just very grateful for this team and their partnership and the work that they're doing for our families, because I think that's pretty awesome.